Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Donna Martinez. Welcome to another edition of Shaftesbury Society, coming to you as we always do, live from Midtown Raleigh, the headquarters of the John Locke Foundation and Carolina Journal. Well, if you have tried to buy alcohol in North Carolina, perhaps if you're new to the state and haven't done this yet, it's a bit different to try to buy alcohol. My husband and I first experienced this when we moved here from Arizona. We saw these stores called ABC, and we didn't even know what it was. We thought it was something like, a Kohl's or a Dillard's. Suddenly, when you try to buy alcohol here, you find out that this is a control state, one of a handful of states that handles things this way. It is complex, it's burdensome, and it's costly to the consumer, and it is a problem for producers as well. We're going to talk about all this today, as there have been efforts over the past few years in the legislature and from advocates, folks like the John Locke Foundation, to try to encourage modernization of the alcohol system here in our state. So today, we're going to talk about that. What are the pros? What are the cons? What do we need to do in order to move towards a freer system? Joining us today are Andy Ellen. Andy is President and General Counsel of the North Carolina Retail Merchants Association. Also, John Sanders, my colleague here at the Locke Foundation. He is Research Editor, Senior Fellow in Regulatory Studies. He writes a lot about alcohol in North Carolina and the control system. And also John Trump, who is Managing Editor of Carolina Journal. John, very knowledgeable in this area. He is the author of the book Still and Barrel, Craft Spirits in the Old North State. You're going to want to get your hands on that. It's a really good read about alcohol in North Carolina. And Representative Tim Moffitt. He is out of Henderson County, North Carolina, representing District 117. He is the chairman of the North Carolina House Alcoholic Beverage Control Committee. So we've got a full slate here, lots of knowledgeable people on this. Folks, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate you being with us to talk about this.
Thank you very much for having us.
Our pleasure. Thanks for hosting us.
Representative Moffitt, let's start with you. Give us your perspective on North Carolina's ABC system.
Well, thank you, Donna. I'd like to thank John Locke Foundation for hosting this panel today, and I appreciate all the great work that you and everyone associated with the foundation does for our state. For those that aren't aware of who I am, I'm currently on my second tour of duty with the General Assembly as a member of the House. In my previous couple of terms, I garnered a reputation as someone who liked to do a deep dive in regulatory reform. So upon my return to the House, Speaker Tim Moore had asked if I would take over the Committee on Alcoholic Beverage Control and take a look at a system that's quite antiquated and see what I could do to solve immediate pressing problems and evolve past a lot of the things that seem to be a drag on alcohol regulation in our state, which ultimately impacts our businesses and our consumers. So the first time I'd actually cracked open Chapter 18B of the General Statutes was about a year ago. And quite honestly, it's like looking at the rings of an oak tree. You can see how the system has evolved ever so slowly, but you can see how politics has entered into a lot of the decisions that are made, how political friends have been helped over the years and how enemies have been dealt with. And it's a pretty interesting ride through history. So taking a fresh look at that regulatory scheme, and it is fraught with problems. It is a extremely complicated system. It's overly bureaucratic. It has multiple layers, and it is not in keeping with how quickly alcohol and the dynamics associated with alcohol are changing in our state, especially when it comes to the area of distilleries. Distilleries is the fastest growing agribusiness in our state, and the ABC system is specifically harsh when it comes to regulation on distilled spirits as compared to wineries, breweries, or cideries. So it's been a great opportunity to visit with a lot of people. The other esteemed panelists that are joining us today probably know a lot more about the system than I do, because I'm just about a year into it. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But I think, especially this past year, we did move the ball down the field quite a bit in a favorable way. And hopefully we can kind of keep the momentum.
Terrific. And to your point about the complexity of this, let me just show this to our audience. I know it's hard to see right here, but you're going to be able to see it up close when you go online to johnlocke.org. This is part of John Sanders' work on the alcohol system in North Carolina. This is a chart, and this is really how it works. And it is so complex that we had to put together a chart to show how everything flows here through this control system. So go to johnlocke.org and click on policy solutions there. If you go into the regulatory area, you're going to find alcohol policy, and you will be able to see this for yourself. It is an eye-opener about how North Carolina handles all of this. John, I know that you are really intrigued and excited that Representative Moffitt is now digging into this because you've been writing about this for so long.
Oh, yes. I'm very glad to have anyone else who's willing to read through Chapter 18B and all of that mess. So that is exciting. I'm happy about that. There are a lot of things that need to be done to open up this industry. This is a natural industry in North Carolina that was basically destroyed by state prohibition. We preceded the nation in many ways in prohibition, especially the Southeast. And in so doing, we destroyed what was at the time the largest wine industry in the then United States. And we had the most legal distilleries in the United States that were just destroyed because of our prohibition, which preceded national prohibition. The only good thing was that we got a great new sport out of it, out of evading federal and state regulators. But
You're talking about NASCAR, right?
Yes, talking about NASCAR. But that's still sort of it's sort of a second prize. We can have both.
So someone help our audience understand, if you would, about what happens when with the process when someone is trying to actually be a producer of liquor. What are the hoops that they have to jump through in order to actually make it to market and try to be able to sell their product?
Well, first they've got to be accepted by the ABC Commission to be sold. Then the distiller would need to ship their product to the warehouse, and they're competing for that listing with all these other brands, and then they need to be stocked, which has become a bigger problem all of a sudden. The commission itself decides what's going to be sold, and then it gets stored in the warehouse. Local ABC boards can order them from the warehouse, and I'm just giving a brief overview. This is a lot more detailed than what I'm saying. Then it would be picked up and sold in the stores. At that point, it would reach the local consumer. Imagine trying to get any other product that way. The middleman is usually a middleman, as opposed to 20 different middlemen with their hands in getting their own little cuts.
And that's just on the state side. I mean, you have the federal aspect too, with labeling and bottles. And you're right, you make a good point where if they do get it approved and get it into the warehouse, then they have to go sell it to each individual ABC board across the state, and that's 170. So it's not like a blanket distribution system. So the key for these guys is trying to get it into the stores. And I think Representative Moffitt can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the idea is too, if in most products that they want equal distribution is going to be a big part of this too, which would be another monkey wrench into the system. So even locally, this is where you would make your bread and butter, but you got basically 1 or 2 ABC stores that they are dealing with, not to mention trying to get it out.
So Donna, to your question too, and Representative Moffitt's conversation or comment about the oak tree, if you go into and look at Chapter 18B, that's 221 pages of statutes and case law on the sale of alcohol. But then you pivot into the administrative rules, and you'll find another 200 pages of administrative rules regulating the sale of alcohol in North Carolina. So it is a very complex system, very contradictory, and one-offs all throughout the system. If you think about it historically, that North Carolina's ABC system was created in 1937. And so to put that into context, FDR was being sworn in for his second term. Amelia Earhart was about to disappear, and World War II had not even started yet. And so that was the system that that was developed at that point in time. And we still are sort of still using that as the base or the structure of the system that we operate in today. And, you know, the world has changed a tremendous amount since 1937. Unfortunately, the system of alcohol, except for the one-offs that Representative Moffitt referenced, has not changed structurally since that point in time.
Why are we stuck, Representative Moffitt, except for a few advances here and there that I know we're going to get to in a few minutes here, but why are we essentially stuck in something that is so obviously antiquated?
Well, I think it's a great question. It's a question that I ask myself frequently because it's one that I hear quite often. Again, it is something that is, as Andy mentioned, it's been around for quite some time. People have grown comfortable with a very structured regulatory scheme when it comes to alcohol. And you have a lot of bureaucracy tied to the system as it stands right now. When Andy was mentioning 200 pages of rules, for those people who are unfamiliar with what that means, it's 200 pages of regulations. And each regulation really represents security for someone who's responsible for administering that regulation. So when you're looking at taking a system that is heavily regulated and you're looking at, you know, diminishing those regulations, then it causes the bureaucracy to have to shrink to accommodate that change. And you get a lot of resistance internally from that type of evolution. Then on the outside, you have people that are, you know, I guess it's a part of the social mores of our state, right? You have people that are rather free thinking when it comes to alcohol's availability, and you have people that are more leaning toward restricting that. So you have battles on both sides. You have the internal battle and you have the external battle. I think politically, because the system has grown so dramatically, since really craft brewing was allowed to come into our state once again, and has become such an important part of all of our counties and a lot of our cities, that people's view toward alcohol is becoming less rigid and more fluid. And I think that's going to create an opportunity where, you know, moving forward, we can have quicker change, but responsible change, but do things that are more positive regarding how we regulate the alcohol as it stands.
I think the sticking point, and this is what I find every time this comes up, is the revenue stream, which was one of the reasons the ABC was instituted in the first place. For the prohibitionists, well, we'll sell this, but we'll give you a cut of revenue in your municipality, which was part and parcel of the growth of ABC boards. And it's replacing the money the ABC board community, or however you want to term that, get from the sale of alcohol. The legislature did well in capping the number of boards. I think at 170, 171. Mm-hmm. So they won't proliferate. But for example, Brunswick County at the beach has 9 boards, because each of these little towns, the Calabasas, the Ocean Isles, the Sunset Beaches, are going to get a share of that revenue. And I think every time this comes up, always the question is, well, how are we going to replace that money? I know Representative McGrady had a plan, and he did get a hearing, but it really didn't go any farther than that.
But speaking of that, John, I think there's a couple things that play off of that as well. Those 170 boards have paid board members that serve on that, and they have individuals that take that revenue and spend it amongst in the community, but unelected officials. And it is very much a political system inside of those 170 boards. I think Representative McGrady's bill that he had put forth and worked on back in the time before he left, you know, would have moved us to a system, I think, that would have held the municipalities and local boards very much harmless financially, but maybe more importantly, would have shifted the ability for those revenues to be allocated by elected county commissioners and elected city council members, rather than an appointed person that was being served or being charged with spreading that money throughout the community, which I think provides a lot more accountability in those local government settings.
I agree. I mean, the revenue comes from the actual sale of the alcohol itself. And I don't see, if you move away from a board system, that somehow the sales diminish and the revenue diminishes. I just think how it is collected and administered changes versus there being an actual reduction in those revenues.
No, that's a good point. And when I looked at it for our policy solutions, it was a little bit under 40% of revenues of all of the total revenue in the system actually went to government purposes. Before then, I mean, the rest of it is something that's just through the retail. So whatever the hold harmless amount, if that's what we're really going to be interested in, and is not that huge of an amount of the total sales in the system.
And to that point, folks, on the issue of the percentage of revenue that goes to government purposes, and John just referenced the numbers there. Again, I'm going to hold up a chart for you. This is the chart that will show you that, at least as of the writing of Policy Solutions. Again, if you want to look at this in detail up close, go to johnlocke.org, click on Policy Solutions, and then head on down into the regulatory area of alcohol policy. It's right there, and you can take a look at the numbers. You know, Representative Moffitt, you used the word security a moment ago in talking about why there could be resistance to this. Are you talking about simply the jobs that are involved with 170 boards across the state? Keeping in mind, we've only got 100 counties, but we've got 170 boards?
That's true. Anytime when you're looking at reining in government or, limiting government in size and scope, then that does have an impact in regards to the number of people that are employed in that section of the government. So I'm sensitive to that. I can appreciate that. But I also have been working in the private sector for over 35 years in management consulting, and I help companies weather the ups and downs of economic cycles. And when they have these contractions, they have to adjust their size and scope to meet the overall changes in the marketplace. And I find it interesting that government often excludes itself from those types of things that are really forced upon the private sector quite routinely, and at times forced upon the private sector by the government itself. So when you're looking at making the ABC system, more efficient, more responsive to the needs of the consumers, then you really have to have that conversation on, are we achieving that with the way that we're structured right now? And I would argue that oftentimes we're not achieving that.
I think the mere idea of a government function shrinking, it just at least rubs some people the wrong way, unless you are folks who believe in government having a more limited role, as we do here at the Locke Foundation. So I can see how that would always be a roadblock there as soon as you discuss this. I do want to get back to, for a moment, if we could, the issue of those who believe that staying with control is a good idea. As I mentioned, I've had several emails from people who say, look, this is a way for the state to essentially put their thumb on the scale and say, we do not encourage drinking. Because some believe that it believes to binge drinking, it believes to driving while drunk, things that society doesn't want to encourage. How should reformers respond to some of those concerns, which on their face, they're legitimate questions and concerns about society?
Donna, let me start with that, if you don't mind. I think, I looked up on Friday on the ABC Commission's website, and just for the restaurants and the private clubs that have mixed beverage permits that sell this same exact product, there were 5,113 private businesses in the state of North Carolina that we allow to sell spirituous liquor in this state. And so we, in some ways, it's ironic that we entrust them as private businesses to sell that product to consumers every single day. I mean, you can walk into an Applebee's, or right below my office, I have two bars, and one across the street and one out back, that all sell this same product that you can't go into another private industry and buy that same item to take home. I would also point out that if you think about the things that government entrusts, this is really the only place in commerce that our state participates. You do not see the government selling pharmaceuticals. They don't sell tobacco. They don't sell firearms or any of those other products, but they do sell alcohol. And somehow we managed to control those other products very, very well. And again, we managed to control those 5,113 businesses that have mixed beverage permits every single day. I think the ABC Commission has played a very good role in its regulatory oversight of the sale of alcohol and issuing permits and those sort of things. But the Board of Pharmacy doesn't sell pharmaceuticals, and ALE doesn't sell tobacco. They should be bifurcated out of the system and continue to regulate it in a very effective and efficient manner that they can do, but without being in the private industry of selling this product.
And I think the only thing we control is what we can buy. And I know John could probably back up numbers of, percentage of what's, sold or whatever, but, you can't get, I wrote a column a while back about it's easy to buy Jim Beam or Smirnoff vodka. So you're catering to the people who can, this is what they drink constantly. But when you're a bourbon connoisseur, for example, or a tequila connoisseur, you can't go out and find a different product or something to taste, not necessarily to sit and drink. And that's what it controls. I don't believe that it controls drinking in any way, shape, or form. Like I say, John could compare that with other states, I think. But what you control is what people can buy, which you control the market, which government controlling, which should be a free market, is a bad thing.
Yeah, John, that's a good point. And I didn't even think about it when I looked into it in terms of like bouquet distilleries versus cheaper stuff that you're more likely to drink at a heavier level. I mean, if you're spending a heck of a lot of money on Pappy Van Winkle, you're not going to just down it, you know. But I think part of the problem goes back to this ancient distinction that we seem to have, which is that liquor is different from beer and wine. And some states will say liquor and wine are different from beer. But so I look at them as an economist as sort of substitute goods. So in North Carolina, we have much stronger controls on liquor than we do on beer and wine. And just looking at sales per capita in the Southeast, and I have 14 states, we are controlling liquor in the sense that when I looked at the data, we were 13th out of 14 states in liquor sales, but we were in the middle of the pack in beer sales, and then in wine, we were 4th out of 14. So I see it as a substitutionary effect. With respect to crime and alcohol-related deaths and binge drinking and that sort of thing, those are matters of law enforcement. It's not really related to whether or not the state has a control system or a license system. Research that I looked into several studies on that, and including one that looked at a bunch of studies, and what they found that there was no. This is Don Boudreau and Julia Williams study. They found no statistically significant relationship between control states and licensed states in alcohol deaths. No statistically significant relationship in terms of binge drinking of teenagers and among young adults 18 to 25, and no statistically significant relationship between control and licensed states and the rates of drunk driving. It has nothing to do basically with whether or not the state controls liquor or allows licensed sales like we do more with beer and wine. And it really has to do with the culture and with law enforcement.
Interesting that we have a couple of comments that have come in on Facebook on this issue. One saying, this is Roger, not all people make bad choices. To continue to allow government to regulate or restrict alcohol for all people because a few people have made bad choices, it's ridiculous. Abby commenting, the argument was also made during the pandemic lockdown that allowing restaurants to sell to-go alcohol would lead to the same. But we 2 years later have seen no increase to indicate that was the case. So some very interesting comments. Thanks to all of you who are watching on Facebook and commenting there. Also, I would remind you that my colleagues have been posting some links for you to articles that John Trump has written on this issue, some work by John Sanders as well. So some easy links right there if you'd like to learn more about how North Carolina handles alcohol, the differences between beer and wine, and some perspective from John Trump as well. Andy, help us understand how retailers, your members, are affected by these different sets of rules and regulations, beer, wine, and then liquor. What does it mean to a retailer?
Well, Donna, I think there's a couple things here, and if anything, the pandemic changed a lot of people's perspective on the world, and we value time nowadays much more than probably we ever have, and your time and your convenience, and that really played out after the pandemic. But I think what you saw is, and we see this in the Charlotte market, for instance, of consumers that just completely bypass the ABC system and they drive across to Fort Mill, South Carolina, and they buy their spirits there because they got tired of going to the ABC store and there being nothing on the shelf. That was a great way to control it. They went instead to South Carolina, or instead, numerous people today, and this is back to the revenue argument, are buying their spirits, and illegally, but buying them online because they can't find the products that they wish to have. And so, you drive across to a Frugal McDougal's or one of the stores, again, on the South Carolina, North Carolina border, or the Tennessee, North Carolina border, and we're bleeding those sales over into those states. And so for a retailer, we see it as we could compete and cater to the customers in the free market like we do normally. I also think it's interesting that we used to make this argument about lottery tickets, but the difference was the lottery ticket was illegal in North Carolina. And some people make them today about fireworks, but the fireworks in South Carolina are illegal in North Carolina. In this case, we're talking about a product that is perfectly legal, but we just don't let you buy it in the free market type establishment. We force you to go online, or we force you to go across the state border to buy it. Again, we think that we would be able to work through the problems just like they are in South Carolina and Tennessee, where they don't seem to have any problem in a free market system of having the products that they want on the shelves to better serve their consumers.
It's kind of, it makes it so difficult as a consumer, because now I understand actually what occurred. Real story from a couple years ago when my husband asked me to stop at an ABC store and pick up a particular brand and type of whiskey that he wanted to try. And so I went there, and he said he had bought it there before. I go to the store and it's not there. I asked the person, who was very nice, working in the store, said, "No, sorry, we don't carry that." I go home, tell my husband that, and he says, "You know what? I must have bought it at a different ABC store." And that just seems kind of crazy that you could, particularly if you're in one of these counties that has more than one ABC store and more than one board, you can go to one store and find something, but go down the street to another store and it won't be there. So it's kind of like, how do you know where to go? Do you end up having to just find particular product in a particular store and just only shop there?
It's a treasure hunt for sure. And in Virginia, for example, at least it's a control system too, but it's centralized. And you can go online and go to the store and see exactly what they have. Here, the only avenue you have to do that is to call, right? So one store may have it and another store. And I think if you're looking for a rare bourbon or something of that sort, you're better off going to Rockingham County or to this, the smaller Chatham County, for example, where there's not 30 stores. And Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's got to be an equal distribution. So stuff will go to a certain store. Everybody says, "Oh, this stuff is in this store." Everybody rushes and buys it, then it's gone.
I guess you're referring to the allocated brands, and that's a whole different discussion. But one of the things that Donna just mentioned about product availability, it can vary county to county. Each county sets its own standard regarding, or each board, the size and scope of its stores. And I've been to some stores that are extremely small, have a limited amount of brands available, and I've gone to others that are quite large. And it's like going to a different time and different state. So one of the practical problems that we have just in North Carolina is that currently we've got 89 distillers in North Carolina. And if each one of those distillers was to produce 3 brands that were accepted by the commission for distribution to the stores, our very own stores could not accommodate the products distilled by North Carolina-based distillers. So that causes you to ask, how many products available outside of our state are our consumers not allowed access to, simply because we don't have the physical space or the number of retail outlets necessary to accommodate that product diversity. one thing that John Sanders had mentioned a moment ago was, so let me digress for a moment. We seem to be talking quite a bit about privatizing the system, and we're really focused on evolving it and modernizing it. So we have quite a few, sessions of hard work and progress to make before any real discussions could be made on, going from a control state to a more licensed state. And for those that are lost kind of in the vernacular, a control state basically means we control the number of retail stores that can actually sell the product itself. And when you're talking about a licensed state, you're actually allowing more retail distribution outside of a local governing board that regulates that product being sold in your community. So when John Sanders was talking about, why do we regulate distilled spirits differently than beer and wine? That's a great question. And I think the next, regulatory pressure that we're going to be filling is on ready-to-drink seltzer products. They're available in our state, but they're only available in ABC stores. Currently, in your average retail outlet, whether it's a grocery store or convenience store, you can get a non-spirits based seltzer that, like White Claw. Andy, you can jump in here with other
Truly,
brands.
White Claw,
Yeah.
White Claw, Truly.
Yeah,
Everybody has a seltzer now.
yeah, everybody, right. So now a new entrant into the ready-to-drink market are the distilled spirits-based seltzers, which are widely available in non-controlled states. But in our states, as I mentioned, they're only available in ABC stores. So it makes me wonder, as a regulator, should we be regulating a distilled spirit outside of alcohol generally, or should we be regulating these products based on alcohol by volume content, regardless of the source of the alcohol? And I think that's probably the next pressure point in regulatory reform that we're going to be having candid conversations about, because, what are we trying to achieve in this regulatory scheme? I think, going back to what Donna had mentioned earlier in some of her comments, when you have a control system, you're controlling the availability of a legal product to your citizens, to your consumers in your state. And I think I've learned a long time ago as a lawmaker that trying to control people generally is folly on your part. So you need to accommodate the demands of the consumers in a responsible regulatory manner that allows some flexibility in a very dynamic and ever-changing industry that meets consumer demand, but in a responsible way to where you don't have these negative outcomes. To the point that one of our listeners had texted in regarding the drinks, the ready-to-go drink or ready-to-go cocktails. I think, although that was an interesting expansion or loosening of the regulatory reform during the pandemic, I'm going to be interested in looking at the empirical data to see if there was any dramatic increase in alcohol related incidents that involve law enforcement during that period of time. That's something that we chose not to extend. So we do have a period of time where that was a more permissive approach to alcohol availability. So looking at those numbers will give us a good idea of where we can go moving forward with alcohol law.
So, Donna, I would also say, and Representative Moffitt mentioned modernization, I think, and I've been doing this about 24 years. If you go back and look at some of the major legislative changes that have happened over the last 20 years, whether that was wine and beer tastings in the grocery store, the craft beer movement of Pop the Cap in 2005, growlers being allowed to be served, and then the earlier Sunday sales. And then this past session, the allowing distillers to open on Sunday and sell more than one product without a tour. If you look at some of those things throughout the time, those were based on consumer choice and consumers' demand, as well as convenience for consumers. The current system doesn't really meet those pieces. But I think with all those, we heard the world is going to end. This is going to cause society to go down the tank. And I think if you look at all of those, that has not been the case. As Representative Moffitt mentioned, craft beer and then in the wineries and the distilleries have helped drive our economies, especially in smaller towns. And it was not the panacea we thought it was going to be. It has actually helped move us forward and modernize us. And so I hope we take a look at those sort of things empirically going backwards, that it did not damage society when we modernized and moved the system forward. And how do we continue to do that to meet, again, what North Carolina constituents and citizens want, and again, to help with people's time constraints that they have. They don't, to your earlier point, they don't want to go buy a Bloody Mary mix and all the fixings with it at the grocery store and drive through traffic all the way across town to buy the bottle of vodka to go with it. They'd rather do one trip and be done with it, and at one location. But that's the situation that they're in today, in this moment that we live.
So it sounds as if we're talking about really a spectrum here, that you've got control on one end and maybe full privatization on the other end, but modernization and reform is happening incrementally. And as different activities are allowed to kind of bypass the system. Is that an accurate representation of how North Carolina is moving, just a step by step by step, rather than just saying, okay, we're going to completely just rip up this system and privatize?
I think it is a fair representation. I think that, government tends to overreact, especially from a law-making standpoint. So I think a thoughtful modernization effort that allows a very antiquated system to evolve at a quicker pace is probably the most responsible way to really meet consumer demand, but also satisfy the concerns of those that are, as Andy had mentioned, these other evolutionary steps that we had taken. People were very concerned about the overall impact when it came to their communities and society in general. And I think the fact that the outcomes have not been negative, that some of that pressure will dissipate over time as we move toward a more free market-based system. I think that from a regulatory standpoint, from a lawmaking standpoint, I trust our citizens to be personally responsible. And I know that there's going to be outliers in every type of community, but we can't allow the outliers to be the determining factor on how we regulate or legislate. And that's something that we have thoughtful discussions about in Raleigh, and we'll continue to do so.
John Sanders, I know that in your writing in Policy Solutions, again, it's available at johnlocke.org. You can read all of this and look at the charts for yourself. John, you advocate for making North Carolina a licensed state in liquor sales, as it is with beer and wine. Why do you advocate that, John?
One, I think it just makes more sense because of just the regulatory confusion that residents have here. And it's, to me, an artificial distinction that ends up supporting a lot of, one of the unique things about North Carolina being a control state is, yes, we have government control over the distribution and sale of liquor, but it's not just the state government. It's broken down into city and county boards. So that's where we're unique in the nation and being a control state, is that it's not just one government that's controlling it. It's 170 boards on top of the state government controlling it. I liked what Representative Moffitt said about remembering, and Andy as well, about honoring the choices of consumers. I think also what the state needs to be doing is promoting business. Distilleries are unique businesses in this state. They are community focused. Most of the distilleries are very small, not just in this state, but normally it's like 92% of them are small, and so nearly all of their sales are going to occur in their local communities, and so they're tied up in that. And so we should be, in my opinion, making things easier for distilleries. And we have seen some incrementalism, such as in the last year, allowing them now to be open on Sundays, whereas they were closed on Sundays where breweries and wineries would be allowed to sell. So now they can be open on Sundays. They can be open on some major holidays. We have this kind of weird distinction in law where they can self-distribute now, but only to people who live out of state. Otherwise, it has to go through the ABC. So that's another way where we can help out, allowing them to distribute more. We recently allowed them to start giving or selling at farmers markets and a lot of trade shows and conventions and events, but the regulators, the lawmakers stuck their toes in the water about that and said, basically you can do it with an airplane bottle and one. So that's an obvious thing that we could expand upon as well.
Andy, what are you advocating for? What would your members like to see as we move down this spectrum?
I think what my members, and which range all kinds of retailers, independent, wine bottle shops that are in the alcohol space, all the way through grocery stores and big box stores, they want to do what's best for their customer and serve their customer the best, and make sure that they're, again, recognizing the time and the convenience and serving them the best way they can, just like when they sell them any other product, and doing it responsibly, just like with beer and wine. We did a poll along with the North Carolina Restaurant and Lodging Association back in 2019, again, pre-pandemic. And the numbers were pretty startling. 53% to 31% thought we should privatize the system. And 55% to 31% thought that the state would be better off regulating alcohol if it was not in the business of selling alcohol. And that cut across every geographic, political party, age, it didn't matter. I think with the tremendous growth North Carolina continues to have in the state, folks like you who moved in from Arizona, you're seeing that even more and more. In northern Wake County, where I live, where I have a lot of people that are coming from somewhere else, they don't understand the system either. But our members who sell spirits in other states would certainly like to be able to sell it here because they do it efficiently and effectively, and most importantly, responsibly in other states. And again, that's the way they serve their customer the very best, by giving their customer what they're looking for. So as a free market type, that's what we would be looking at. But I think we also want to continue an eye of making sure that we empower the ABC Commission to regulate the sale of alcohol efficiently and effectively, and also looking at modernizing other things that would help even in the beer and wine space. I mean, we've made tremendous progress there, as Representative Moffitt mentioned, and we need to continue to look at how to grow the wineries, the breweries, and the distilleries, because that benefits every community when they're creating jobs and employing people and collecting and paying sales tax.
That's a good point, Andy. I think that the average person doesn't really recognize that there's a distinction between the ABC Commission and the ABC boards. They are represented by two separate groups of folks. The ABC Commission, they are the regulatory authority in the state overseeing alcohol, and they'll always have a role in regards to how we manage this particular product or range of products that are alcohol based in our state. When it comes to the ABC boards, John Trump mentioned it correctly. I mean, they are their own regulating entity in regards to each one of the areas that they serve for that board. We have 100 counties, 170 boards. We have 439 retail locations that are overseen by these boards. So, that's really probably what we're talking about most when we look at a license system and privatizing. But when you're looking at generally, regulatory reform, we're looking at what the ABC Commission itself does. From my perspective, I understand, the foundation of what our nation is about, what our state is about, and really something that we typically lose sight of. I believe that the private sector needs to be thriving and given an opportunity to expand and develop products and meet the needs of our consumers, because without a robust, thriving private sector, none of the rest of this really exists. And so as we modernize a system, as we're preserving the space where these businesses can thrive, we need to see where we can expand that space to give them more flexibility, be more timely more responsive to what their needs are from a regulatory standpoint, simply because time is money. And one thing that I have learned being behind the curtain and watching government work is the fact that they're never under time pressure. There is no sense of urgency on the part of the regulating community as there is in the business community. So being in a place where I am trying to influence that, those are the things that really underpin the way that I approach all things from a regulatory reform standpoint, because I think that's important. And I think that we lose sight of the impact that regulations or the lack of timely response to our business community, the negative impacts that those can have, and hopefully we can eliminate that.
Of course,
Also,
businesses are out there trying to get customers and trying to serve customers. And one has to wonder if we were to modernize, if there wouldn't be some downward pressure on prices. And I want to show folks one thing. This is in a really great piece that was produced by Business North Carolina Magazine. Excuse me. You can find it on their website, Business North Carolina Magazine. And they did a chart here in this very long piece about how the control system works. It's a really good piece. A chart of the impact on price, and they headlined it this way: how ABC marks up a $13 bottle of liquor to $26. I show this because it just seems to me that as we head towards a reform and modernization, that one of the pressures, and a positive pressure, should be trying to infuse some competition into the system, which would expand the product line in stores, and also put pressure on downward on prices. No, wouldn't that be the case?
I would certainly hope so. And I think, Donna, you showed all those charges that come up, and right now we're still having a hard time getting it from the warehouse into the ABC stores. But what I also want to emphasize is, every Thursday and Friday, I have 2 bars below me, and I watch the employees drive up in their personal vehicles and unload all the spirits and walk it in. We have an amazing system of distribution in this state for beer and wine with the beer and wine wholesalers. And I think, they're making the trip to both bars below me to bring beer and wine. And I think they would serve an amazing role. They know logistically how to get the product from the warehouse to the stores. And I think could do the same thing and make sure that the warehouses are running right. Our supply chain, as you know, for all kinds of things, has been badly damaged. But those guys have done this for perfection, for decades. And I think they could do an amazing job doing the same with spirits as they do with beer and wine, and get it to those restaurants or get it to the retail outlet as well.
And regarding prices, it controls prices for the higher level stuff. I mean, we're not going to pay $500 for a bottle of Pappy Van Winkle or Buffalo Trace or whatever it may be, but you can't get it. And that's the issue. Price controls don't matter if you don't have access to this stuff. And maybe it's these boards or these stores need more of an incentive to be competitive. I mean, it used to be where in the bourbon world, Anger, which I think is Harnett County, was the place to go to get, Andy knows, the place to get your bourbon. And every time I go, I used to live in Madison, Rockingham County, and every time we go up there, we stop at the ABC store because I know there's going to be something that I cannot possibly get in Wake County, which is, I think, that and Meck is the biggest county in the state, but Wake County, I cannot literally buy anything. I mean, so there has to be, and if you're a government worker, an employee, and they all do fine jobs, and the ABC Commission is very responsive, but there's got to be some incentive for competition to be better than they are in Rockingham or Harnett County. So other than just throw up your hands and say, well, we can't get it from the warehouse.
Interesting comment on Facebook from Scott. Writing this: as a step towards modernization, as an NC distillery, I'd like a report on which mixed beverage customers purchase our products so that we could support their efforts. National organizations have those reports, but too costly for small distillers. Any comments on that? Okay. Got an interesting also comment from Aaron saying, can the panel discuss private versus public bars? With the modernization, we need to allow public bars in NC. Forcing the membership only if you are not a restaurant is too restrictive. Customers can go to a, quote, restaurant bar with no membership, no tracking.
North Carolina doesn't have bars, right? Technically, we really don't. They're private clubs.
Yeah, and of course, during the pandemic, we saw with the distinction between private taverns and restaurants and who could actually operate and sell product and who couldn't. So this topic is really getting a lot of traction here on Facebook, and I would encourage everyone who's watching us to take a look at some of those comments and make sure you check out some of the links that we are providing for you in terms of the work done here at the John Locke Foundation on this issue, also John Trump's writing on alcohol, and that Business North Carolina article that I mentioned to you that has this chart in it about the price markups. The link to that piece is also in the comments section. All right, so what do we do here? What is the next step? Representative Moffitt, what are you going to be looking at the House Alcoholic Beverage Control Committee?
Well, that's a great question. It seems like every day I am met with an additional challenge in regards to those 200 pages of rules that Andy had mentioned at the beginning of today's conversation. I would like to touch on something that John Trump had mentioned. The ABC Commission is a regulatory body, and it is comprised of very thoughtful, very capable, very knowledgeable people. And I will tell you, they've been extremely accommodating in regards to being very responsive to any of the challenges that I have had along the line of regulating alcohol in our state. And as a body, when they if they err, it's on the side of being more restrictive. And I think that that's probably where we want them to be, simply because they are following the letter of the law, which means that I, as a lawmaker, and the other 169 other members of the House and Senate, we have the ability to solve the problems, to really dictate what the regulations are for this industry and how they're supposed to be carried out. So when I look at the short session, I think we'll continue along the lines of where we started at the beginning of the long session, which I think we're currently still in it, right? I think, Andy, we're still in the long session. We haven't really
54th week.
We are. So I think we'll probably end the long session on a Friday and start the short session on a Monday. But we do have some leftover things that did not get accomplished in the long session. We have a technical corrections bill that's got some clarifying language in there regarding social districts and other things that came out of our efforts in a long session. And I think probably the number one topic that's going to be on my desk is what to do with the ready-to-drink cocktails, or the ready-to-drink seltzers. And again, those are distilled spirits-based seltzers that are currently available only in our ABC stores. And there's a lot of pressure generally in the marketplace from the retail merchants, from other camps on, how can we accommodate consumer demand and make these products more available, but not throw the baby out with the bathwater from a regulatory standpoint. So that's something that we're going to be wrestling with. One thing that Andy had mentioned earlier about the distribution, beer and wine wholesalers, the distribution systems that they have and the expertise in which they bring to the market. One of the things that, and I don't agree with our governor, Roy Cooper, on many things, but I think he made a great appointment by appointing Hank Bauer, someone that comes from private industry, from the beer and wine wholesalers industry, as someone that actually is appointed to a job that knows what they're doing in regards to overseeing a structured bureaucracy responsible for an industry that they have practiced in privately. I've been working with Hank. He's extremely knowledgeable. He and I see a lot of areas that we can improve. So I think you'll see some rapid improvement from a consumer standpoint, from a permitting standpoint, as we tackle some of these more delicate issues regarding whether or not to regulate alcohol by volume versus source of alcohol. So it's going to be an exciting short session. I would encourage everybody to stay tuned.
Andy, sounds like there's some specifics there that Representative Moffitt's going to be looking at. Your reaction?
I think that would be very welcome. And back to one of the things Representative Moffitt said a minute ago about the 200 pages of rules. If you open up Chapter 18B, the very first section is about the purpose of the chapter. And what it basically says is that anything that's not expressly allowed is not permissible in North Carolina with regards to alcohol, which a lot of the things myself and our staff do is answer questions from local bottle shops, wine shops, restaurants, others that sell alcohol, beer and wine, of can I put this sign out? Can I do this or not? Not because they're trying to flaunt the system, but they just want to make sure when they put their head on the pillow at night that they're following the law and not going to get a violation. And you know, for instance, I walk around town and I'll be headed to lunch and somebody will have a sandwich board out front of their restaurant that has a beer logo on it. And a lot of times I'll do the nice thing and walk in and say, that's a minimum of a $750 fine if you have that outside your business. Again, person's not trying to flaunt the system, do anything wrong, but it's just buried deep in one of these rules that you're not allowed to do that. And there's so many other things like that that the system probably really needs a deep dive into. Okay, these were set up for a reason, but are those reasons, are those purposes still relevant nowadays? And I think that's, you know, something that we want to continue to work with Representative Moffitt and Senator Johnson on the Senate side and some others, and as well as the ABC Commission, to try and help walk through some of those things.
I know the happy hour, there's no happy hour in North Carolina. It's got to be an all day thing. And I know a lot of people don't realize that. And it's almost like when you look at 18B, which is 70,000 words or something like that, it's a layer of an onion, you know, and you don't know it's there. The bottom layer is spoiled until you start peeling it.
The number one call we got for a long time was bottle shops and breweries that would have run clubs. And they would give the runners at the end, I guess, because they need one more beer after they got finished running, you know, $1 off a pint, which was deemed to be a happy hour. And so we would say, you can't do that. And they were like, but it's not a happy hour. It's just for our people that come run. And we're like, I understand, but not allowed. Back to John's point.
It is an incredibly complex system. And once again, I showed you the chart a little bit earlier, folks, and this is just the basics of it. You're going to find this in the alcohol policy section of Policy Solutions. You can find that at johnlocke.org. There's also a link in the comments section if you're watching us on Facebook. This will give you the overview of how this system works. And as you can tell from our conversation, all sorts of details here that have very real impacts on the retailers and also on those of us who are consumers. And that's where this effort is now underway, to start looking at the modernization. What would be the pros? What would be the cons? Who is going to oppose it and why? Big conversation still to be had here in North Carolina. Andy Ellen is with the North Carolina Retail Merchants Association. John Sanders is my colleague here at the Locke Foundation, as is John Trump, who is managing editor of Carolina Journal, and Representative Tim Moffitt. He is the chairman of the North Carolina House Alcoholic Beverage Control Committee. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, everyone.
Appreciate the conversation.
Thanks, John. Thanks, John.
And of course, we thank you for joining us as well, as we do every week. So glad that you are engaged and that you want to be part of these conversations. Some very real public policy concerns and questions about where North Carolina will head as we continue our way into 2022. Hope that you are enjoying this. Tell your friends about us. Lastly, I would ask you to consider helping the John Locke Foundation fuel the work that we do here on behalf of more freedom, more liberty for every person who lives in our state. If you would like to make a tax-deductible donation, we are a nonprofit. It's very fast and easy. Just go to johnlocke.org, and in the upper right-hand corner, you can hit the Donate tab. It's safe, secure, fast. Less than 2 minutes, you can make that tax-deductible donation. We would greatly appreciate your support. Glad you joined us today. I'm Donna Martinez. On behalf of the entire team, have a great week, and we'll see you next Monday.